6 years. That's how long I raised another man's child without knowing it. 6 years of birthday parties, bedtime stories, and believing he was mine. My name is Justin, and this is the story of how I discovered my wife, Sophia, had an affair with my best friend Brandon, and what happened afterwards. Everything began years ago at Meridian Technologies, a mid-sized software company in downtown Phoenix. I was working in the IT infrastructure department. The pay was decent, and I'd been there for about 3 years when Sophia joined the marketing team. Sophia was beautiful, in every way a man can describe the word. We met during a company-wide meeting about a new product launch where IT had to coordinate with marketing on the technical specifications for the website rollout. The attraction was immediate, but we both knew about Meridian's policy on workplace relationships. They had this strict rule that employees couldn't date anyone in their reporting chain, and while we weren't technically in the same department, the company culture made it clear that office romances were heavily discouraged. People had been fired for less, so we kept things quiet. We'd grab coffee at different shops during lunch breaks, text each other constantly, and find excuses to collaborate on projects that didn't really need both departments involved. Brandon, my best friend who worked in the accounting department, knew something was up, but I didn't tell him the details at first. Brandon and I had known each other since college. He was the kind of guy you could call at 3 in the morning if your car broke down, and he'd show up with jumper cables and coffee. The sneaking around lasted about many months. Sophia and I would meet at her apartment after work, spend weekends together when we could make excuses to our coworkers about being busy, and basically lived this double life where we were falling in love but couldn't tell anyone about it. The stress of hiding it was eating both of us alive. By month 5, we knew we were serious enough that one of us would have to leave the company. Sophia was making less money than me, and she'd been complaining for months about how burned out she was getting. The corporate world was draining her. She'd work 12-hour days on campaign launches, deal with demanding clients who changed their minds every other week, and come home exhausted. She had this dream of starting her own online business. She'd been researching dropshipping, affiliate marketing, and had even started a small Instagram account where she posted about lifestyle and wellness topics. It was growing slowly but steadily. The plan was that if we got married, she'd quit her job, focus on building her online presence, and eventually we'd start a family where she could be a stay-at-home mom. Financially, it made sense. My salary could cover our basic expenses, and if her online business took off, we'd actually be better off than we were with both our corporate jobs. Plus, she genuinely hated the office politics and constant pressure of hitting quarterly targets. So that's what we decided. We got engaged after dating for 8 months. And Sophia put in her 2 weeks' notice the same day we announced our engagement to our families. The timing worked out perfectly because Meridian's busy season was ending, and her replacement could start fresh with a new quarter. Brandon was thrilled when I asked him to be my best man. He'd been through a rough patch with his own wife at the time, some issues with her spending and them not communicating well. So he threw himself into helping plan my bachelor party and was genuinely excited to see me happy. The wedding was in October 2017, about 6 months after we got engaged. We kept it relatively small, about 50 people, mostly family and close friends. Sophia looked incredible in her dress, and I remember thinking during the ceremony that I was the luckiest guy alive. Brandon gave this speech at the reception about how he'd never seen me happier and how Sophia was perfect for me. He talked about loyalty and friendship and how some bonds can never be broken. The irony of those words now is almost too much to handle. Sophia's online business started picking up momentum after the wedding. She was posting consistently, had partnered with a few small brands for sponsored content, and was bringing in about $1,200 a month by our first anniversary. It wasn't huge money, but it was growing, and she was happy. She'd wake up when she wanted, work from our kitchen table in her pajamas, and seemed genuinely content with the choice she'd made. We started trying for a baby about 8 months after the wedding. Sophia had always wanted to be a mom, and I was ready to be a dad. She got pregnant on our 3rd month of trying, and we were over the moon. The pregnancy went smoothly, and our son Tyler was born in September 2018, almost exactly 3 years after we'd first met at that company meeting. From the moment Tyler was born, there were no suspicions or anything. Newborns don't really look like anyone specific, right? They're all red and wrinkled and just look like tiny humans. But as the months went by and Tyler started developing his features, I began noticing differences. His eyes were brown. Both Sophia and I have blue eyes. I took basic biology in high school, and I knew that two blue-eyed parents should have a blue-eyed child. I didn't mention this to Sophia because I didn't want to spark distrust. Again, we had relatives from both sides with brown eyes, so maybe it was some recessive gene thing. I didn't push it. But there were other things as the child grew. Tyler's hair texture was different from both of ours. His facial structure as he got older didn't resemble me at all, and people stopped making those polite comments about how much he looked like his dad. My own mother made a comment once about how Tyler must take after Sophia's side of the family. The thing is, when you love someone and trust them completely, you talk yourself out of these suspicions. You tell yourself that genetics are complicated, that babies can look like distant relatives, that you're being ridiculous. And I love Tyler. Whatever doubts I had about his appearance, he was my son in every way that mattered. Biology felt less important than the bond we were building. Brandon was around a lot during Tyler's first few years. He'd come over for barbecues, bring gifts for Tyler's birthday, and play with him in the backyard. Tyler seemed to gravitate toward Brandon, which I thought was sweet at the time. Brandon was good with kids, and since he and Lisa were having trouble conceiving, I figured he enjoyed being the fun uncle figure. Things continued like this for years. Sophia's business grew to the point where she was making about $3,000 a month. Tyler started first grade, and we'd settled into this comfortable family routine. We weren't wealthy, but we were stable. We owned our house, had minimal debt, and were talking about maybe having another child. Then came March 15th, 2024. I'll never forget that date because it's when my entire world collapsed. I was at work dealing with a day's task when my phone rang. It was Tyler's school. The nurse explained that Tyler had fallen during recess and hit his head on the playground equipment. He was conscious and talking, but they were concerned about a possible concussion and wanted him taken to the emergency room as a precaution. I dropped everything and raced to hospital. Sophia met me there, and we spent the next 4 hours in the ER waiting room while doctors ran tests. Tyler was okay, thank God, but he needed a minor procedure to clean a deep cut on his forehead, and they wanted to do some blood work to rule out any internal injuries. When the nurse asked about our family medical history and blood types, I realized I didn't actually know Tyler's blood type. They took samples from both Sophia and me to help with the compatibility checks for the procedure. This is where things get complicated, and I need to be clear about the timeline here. The blood work came back showing that Tyler was type O positive. I'm type O negative, which is universal donor, and Sophia is type B positive. The nurse mentioned this casually, saying Tyler must have inherited the A from a grandparent, but something about that didn't sit right with me. I'm not a doctor, but I remember enough from high school biology to know that two parents with O and B blood types couldn't have a child with type A blood. While Tyler was getting his stitches, I pulled out my phone and Googled blood type inheritance. What I found made my stomach drop. A parent with type O blood can only pass on the O allele. A parent with type B blood can pass on either B or O alleles. The possible combinations for their children are type B or type O. There is no way for parents with O and B blood types to have a child with type A blood. I stared at my phone screen in that hospital corridor, reading the same information over and over again, hoping I was misunderstanding something. But the genetics were clear. Tyler could not be my biological son. The rational part of my brain started making excuses. Maybe there was a mistake with the blood typing. Maybe I was wrong about my own blood type, even though I'd donated blood dozens of times and was definitely O negative. Maybe Sophia was wrong about hers. I didn't say anything to Sophia at the hospital. Tyler was my priority, and he needed to get home and rest. I spent the next week researching DNA testing options. I found a lab called DNA Diagnostic Center that could do paternity testing with just a cheek swab, and they offered confidential results within 7 business days. The cost was $299, which felt like both nothing and everything at the same time. Nothing because it was just money, and everything because it was the price of potentially destroying my family. I collected the samples on a Saturday morning while Sophia was at her yoga class. Tyler was watching cartoons, and I told him we were playing a game where I needed to swab the inside of his cheek for a pretend science experiment. He thought it was fun and cooperated completely. I submitted the samples that afternoon and tried to act normal for the next week while waiting for results. The email came on a Thursday at 2:30 in the afternoon. The subject line was simple: paternity test results available. The probability of paternity was 0%. I read the report 3 times before it really sank in. Then I called in sick for the rest of the day and drove around trying to process what this meant. 6 years of my life raising another man's child. 6 years of believing my wife. 6 years of being played for a fool. But more than that, I had to face the reality that Tyler wasn't actually mine. And if he wasn't mine, then whose was he? That night, I confronted Sophia. I waited until Tyler was asleep and asked her to sit down in our living room. I told her about the blood type discovery at the hospital and that I'd gotten a DNA test done. She immediately went on the defensive, insisting that Tyler was my son and that there must be some mistake with the test. I showed her the DNA results on my phone. She stared at the screen for a long time, and I watched her face go through several emotions: confusion, fear, and finally resignation. She started crying, probably knowing she had been caught. She confessed that she'd had sex with Brandon once after our wedding. According to her, he came over to drop off things for me, but I asked him to stay and have something, and he did, but one thing led to another. She claimed it was just that one time that she made a terrible mistake and that she never allowed it happen the second time. The betrayal felt like drowning. Not just that she'd cheated on me, but that she'd let me raise another man's child for 6 years. She'd watched me bond with Tyler, watched me work to support our family, watched me forego about having more children, all while knowing that Tyler wasn't mine. I asked her if Brandon knew. She said she wasn't sure, that they'd never discussed it after it happened, and that she'd convinced herself Tyler was mine because we'd been having regular sex during that period. But looking at Tyler now, she admitted that deep down she'd suspected the truth for years, but was too afraid to face it. I left the house that night and stayed at a hotel. I needed space to think and figure out what I was going to do next. The first thing I did was call Brandon. I told him I needed to see him and that it was urgent. We met at a coffee shop near his office the next morning. He could tell something was wrong, and when I told him about the DNA test and what Sophia had confessed, his face went white. He didn't deny it. He admitted that he'd suspected Tyler might be his son, but had never said anything because he didn't want to destroy my marriage or complicate Tyler's life. He claimed he'd been racked with guilt for years, but didn't know how to handle the situation. I asked him how he could stand and call himself my best friend, knowing what he'd done. How he could come to Tyler's birthday parties and Christmas dinners and act like nothing had happened. How he could look me in the eye for 6 years and pretend to be my friend. He started making excuses, talking about how it was a mistake and how much he regretted it, and how he never meant for any of this to happen. That's when I lost it. I punched him in the face, broke his nose, and left him bleeding. It wasn't my finest moment, but 6 years of betrayal had just exploded out of me all at once. I filed for divorce 2 weeks later. I also explored legal options for what's called paternity fraud, where someone tricks a man into believing he's the father of a child that isn't his. My lawyer explained that while paternity fraud is morally reprehensible, it's not actually a crime in Arizona, and civil lawsuits for it rarely succeed. We tried anyway. I sued Sophia for the emotional distress and financial damages of raising Tyler under false pretenses. The lawsuit dragged on for 11 months, and in the end, the judge dismissed the case, ruling that since I'd willingly acted as Tyler's father and hadn't been legally compelled to do so, I couldn't recover damages for my voluntary support. The divorce wasn't favorable to me, despite the fact that Sophia had committed adultery and had essentially defrauded me about Tyler's paternity. The judge, although sympathetic to my position, allowed my argument to keep the house since Sophia doesn't want it. Since we didn't have much beyond the house and our retirement accounts, she walked away with some $1,000 total, and her 2019 Honda CR-V. The hardest part was Tyler. Legally, since my name was on his birth certificate and I'd been his father for 6 years, I had parental rights and responsibilities. But I chose to relinquish them. I know that sounds cold, but I couldn't look at Tyler without seeing Brandon's face, and I couldn't continue being a father to a child who was a constant reminder of the worst betrayal of my life. Sophia and Tyler moved into a rental house across town. Her online business was doing well enough to support them, and I'm sure Brandon was helping financially, though I tried not to think about those details. But I wasn't done with Brandon. See, Brandon's marriage to Lisa had been rocky for years, but they'd stayed together partly because of financial concerns and partly because Lisa didn't want to deal with the hassle of divorce. Brandon made good money in accounting, about $95,000 a year, and they had a nice house and lifestyle that Lisa enjoyed. I knew Lisa fairly well from all the double dates and social gatherings over the years. She was a decent person who deserved better than being married to a cheating liar. So I did something that I'm still not sure was right, but it felt necessary at the time. I called Lisa and told her everything. Not just about Brandon's affair with Sophia, but about Tyler being his son. I explained the whole timeline and offered to pay for her divorce attorney if she wanted to leave Brandon. Lisa was devastated, but not entirely surprised. She said she'd suspected Brandon of cheating before, but had never had proof. The fact that he had a son with another woman was the final straw for her. I ended up paying $16,000 for Lisa's divorce attorney. The lawyer was aggressive and thorough, and they uncovered some financial issues where Brandon had been contributing to a retirement account that Lisa didn't know about, plus he'd been hiding some side consulting income. Lisa ended up with the house, half of Brandon's assets. Did this make me feel better? Not really. Brandon lost his marriage and financial security. Lisa lost her stable life even though she got the assets. Sophia lost her marriage and had to raise Tyler as a single mother, and Tyler lost the only father he'd ever known. And me? I lost everything that mattered. My wife, my son, my best friend, and my faith in the people closest to me. The house felt empty and quiet. It's been months since concluding everything. I've been in therapy since last June, trying to work through the betrayal and the guilt about walking away from Tyler. My therapist keeps telling me that I need to forgive, not for their sake, but for my own, but I'm not there yet. Brandon tried to reach out a few months ago, wanting to talk and apologize properly. I wasn't ready for that conversation then, and I'm still not sure I ever will be. Some betrayals cut too deep to ever fully heal. When I look at women these days, trust doesn't come easily anymore. When I hear someone says they're working late or has to cancel plans unexpectedly, my mind immediately goes to the worst-case scenario. It's not fair to the women I'm meeting, and I know I need to work through these issues before I can have a healthy relationship again. The financial aftermath has been manageable. Without having to support a family, my single income goes a lot further. I've been able to pay off my credit cards and build up my emergency fund. There's something to be said for the simplicity of only having to take care of yourself. But it's a lonely kind of simplicity. When you trust someone completely, you don't go looking for evidence of their betrayal. You take their word at face value and build your life around the assumption that they're being honest with you. The hardest lesson I've learned is that people are capable of living with massive lies for years without it showing on their faces or affecting their daily behavior. Sophia kissed me goodbye every morning and told me she loved me every night while knowing that our entire family was built on deception. Brandon shook my hand at social gatherings and asked about Tyler's school and sports activities while knowing that Tyler was his biological son. I don't know what the future holds. I'm 34 years old, starting over in a lot of ways, and trying to rebuild my ability to trust people. I have this hole in my life where Tyler used to be. I miss having someone excited to see me when I come home from work. I miss feeling like I was building something bigger than just my own individual life. I know there are people who will judge me for walking away from Tyler, and I understand that criticism. But I also know that staying would have meant a lifetime of looking at him and seeing the betrayal rather than the child I love. Maybe that makes me selfish or weak, but it was the only choice I could live with. If you're going through something similar, if you've discovered that your partner has been lying to you about something fundamental, I want you to know that the pain does get more manageable with time. Not better exactly, but more manageable. You learn to carry it differently. I also want you to know that whatever you decide to do about your situation, it's your choice to make. People will have opinions about whether you should forgive or leave, whether you should seek revenge or take the high road, but ultimately, you're the one who has to live with the consequences of your decisions. For me, the path forward is still unclear. I don't know if I'll ever have the family I thought I wanted, or if I'll ever be able to trust someone completely again. But I do know that I'm not the same person I was before this discovery. I'm more cautious, more skeptical, but also more aware of what really matters to me and what I'm willing to accept in my relationships. The truth is messy and complicated, and doesn't always lead to the resolution you're hoping for. Sometimes the good guys don't win. Sometimes revenge doesn't feel as satisfying as you thought it would. And sometimes the people you love most are the ones who hurt you deepest. But you survive it. You figure out how to keep going, even when everything you thought you knew about your life turns out to be wrong. You learn to trust yourself again, even if trusting others takes longer. And eventually, you start to believe that maybe there's still good stuff ahead, even if it looks different from what you originally planned. Thank you for watching.